Good morning again. I'm Christine, and I
And I'm
am one of
Marty.
your.
Oh yeah,
Yes,
sorry.
no, that's fine. I was waiting and you didn't go, so we need to rehearse more, apparently. Oh, have we started? We have started recording. Wonderful. Um, so we are talking about preprints today, as I said. Before we go too far, we want to talk a little bit about GoToWebinar. There is a option to enter questions in a chat box. If your GoToWebinar is minimized, you need to get it back up again. At the bottom of your screen, you'll have like a little kind of flowery icon. If you click on that, that should bring up your GoTo menu, which looks kind of like this. There is a spot for questions in the little gray box. If you need to make it bigger, there's this little triangle. It's currently pointing down to show that it is open. And below that is where you would enter your question and then click on send in order to send it to us. And we will try our best to keep an eye on the questions as we go along. Okay, so anytime you have a question, just ask. All right, so today we have a few things on the agenda. We're going to talk briefly about MyNet for those of you who may not be familiar with MyNet. We're going to talk about preprints, what they are, what's good about them, what's not so good about them. We're going to talk about where you can find them. Talk a bit about Orvy's favorite topic, critical appraisal. Once you've found something and appraised it and decided you want to use it, you need to cite it to say where you got it from. So we're going to talk about citation. And that's it. That's all we've got on our agenda. So moving along. If you haven't really heard about MyNet before, basically we are an online library service for folks who work at Manitoba Health, seniors in active living, staff at rural health regions, and fee-for-service physicians in Manitoba. So we have a variety of services. We do sessions like these. These are open to everybody. We don't restrict access to the webinars. We also do lit searches. So if you have a topic and you need some articles about it, you can give us a call, send us an email. We'll have a look, see what we can find. And then we also do document delivery. So we'll get articles that are of interest for you and send them to you electronically. Okay, we also have a subscription to UpToDate. So you may or may not be familiar with UpToDate. It's a clinical decision support tool, and it's quite popular. So MyNet folk and actually pretty much any healthcare person in the province has access to UpToDate. And there's information about that on our website. Okay, since we are a library, we have a library card, and we usually recommend that if you don't have one, you get one, just so that later, if you're in a really big hurry and you need some articles or something, you don't have to go through the process of registering. It's already set up, and you can just send us an email and say, I need these 5 things, and we can just go ahead and get them for you. So there's information about that on our website. You fill out the form, send it to us, and we'll set you up. Okay, so the MyNet team has 4 people in it. There's Orvy and myself, of course, but we've also got Gail and Cheryl. So if you've ever requested articles, Cheryl is the magician that gets them for you. So she is crucial to our operation. Oops, I'm just if I'm going too fast, I feel like we need to stick to time today. Just send a message in the questions saying slow down or something. But otherwise, if there are no questions about the MyNet service, we can keep going. Good? Okay. All right, so preprints. What are preprints? Basically, a preprint is a manuscript. And so a team of researchers has done some research project. The project itself is finished. They've written a manuscript, and it's at the point where they are ready to share it with the world, right? So they can post it online to what's called a preprint server, and then it's out there and available. So I've got this nifty graphic here. This is from the National Institute of Health. And this kind of shows where preprints fall in the publication process, right? So you start on the left, you've got your preprint, it's posted, people can make comments, people can read it. And then if the team wants to go ahead and submit to a journal, then they would do that. And then there'd be all the processes that are involved with journal publication. So there'd be peer review and editing and all that stuff until finally it gets to be a published article, right? So it's kind of an early version of the work. Okay, so preprints, like I said, the research is finished, but a preprint can change based on feedback that's received. So that's just something to keep in mind. All right, so preprints. There's a lot of disciplines that have been using preprints for a really long time. And part of the reason for that is it's faster dissemination of research. So anyone who's participated in that whole process that's laid out in that diagram there knows that publishing in a journal takes a fairly long time. Like some journals are faster than others, but generally speaking, it's pretty lengthy. So posting to a preprint server means you can get your work out faster, right? There's also an argument to be made for making it available widely to generate scientific discussion, right? So someone's done a research project, they want to get it out there as fast as possible, they post it, and then others in that discipline can read it, they can provide comments, they can ask questions, and that really is quite useful for a number of reasons. For one thing, it helps the science move along. But also there are times when things get posted that are not so good, not great quality. And so I've got an example here of an article that was published last year, and it's about a retraction of a coronavirus paper. Right, so with COVID, like there was nothing out there on COVID, so everyone wanted to get their research out as fast as possible, and so preprints in health became a real important thing, whereas it wasn't so much before, right? So in this particular story, just the highlights. There was a preprint. It was posted to a repository called, I don't know if we are supposed to spell this out or just say it, but I'm gonna do it, BioRxiv. And basically it gave the impression that COVID-19 was developed in a lab. I'm sure you've all heard the conspiracy theories about how COVID-19 has been engineered and let out into the world. And I'm not saying that it came from this one, but this particular article certainly wouldn't have helped. Anyway, so the scientific community, because they're keeping an eye on things, they read this particular preprint, and they were pretty quick to identify the faults that were in this research, right? And so based on this expert feedback, the preprint itself was removed from the server, right? So you might think, oh my God, that's horrible. They're saying COVID was developed in a lab, but the upshot here is that someone caught it, right? And it didn't stay up for very long, right? And that's kind of the good news moment for science that they're talking about here.
Christine, when you mentioned that the normal process for an article to be accepted in a journal, how long would you say is sort of a normal, or what is a typical range?
You mean to go through that whole process?
Yeah, for the whole process.
It really depends on the journal, because some journals are really fast. It can take like 6 months, a year, just the whole process, because they gotta find peer reviewers. The peer reviewers got to go through it. They got to provide their feedback. The feedback goes back to the authors. The authors have to address it. Then maybe it goes back to peer review again. And then finally, when it gets to the point where the journal says, yes, this is gonna be accepted, this meets the standard, that we aim for, then there's copy editing and things like that. So it takes a lot of back and forth and a lot of time.
Yeah, and one of our participants has also said 6 months to a year in the chat. So I wanted to make sure everybody understood that, because fast can have any number of different meanings or slow. But part of the reason that preprints, became so prevalent, especially to us, was last year about this time when to get any kind of information on COVID, you could only be looking at preprints, especially as, Donald Trump was saying about, like, oh, I heard about this new drug that treats COVID. And the only place where you could see trial data or any kind of information was in the preprints. And so waiting 6 months to a year just was not going to be long enough. So just to kind of give that context about what's fast and what's slow.
Thank you. Exactly. So obviously, if you're dealing with something like COVID, you don't want to wait. so that's part of the reason why in health it suddenly preprints became a thing, right? Yeah. So another example of kind of quality control by the community, if you want to call it that. I've got a screenshot here of a tweet. So on February 13th, David Davis was saying, oh, there's a study, it's about vitamin D and COVID, and it's super important, and it's clear that this is, super amazing and cheap and safe. And then if you look like on the February 19th, so like a week later, Nick Brown here, who was kind of retweeted this tweet with comments, was saying that the article was retracted. And if we go to, that didn't work so well. If we were to look at the Lancet's site, they have a preprint site that they maintain. And you can see in the comments that, yeah, there were concerns about the descriptions of the research in this paper. So it was not necessarily up to snuff. So they had so many concerns that they actually took it down, right? But you can also see that they left the comments. So you can still see that this was posted, right? It was posted in January. You can see what people had to say about it, and then that would kind of inform you about like why it would have been taken down, right? So it says things don't just disappear in the night. they do have a record, and that's important, right, for transparency and everything. All right, so this is all good, catching things before that gets too widely circulated. It's also a home for unpublished manuscripts, and I think that again, if you've submitted to a journal before, you know that journals aren't interested in everything, right? For a variety of reasons, right? Maybe it's not their audience. Maybe they only like to publish things that are like breakthrough, and an article is kind of like, yep, confirms what we knew. Nothing exciting here, right? So if a group has done some research and they can't find a home for it in a publication, then they can still make it available as a preprint, right? So the work has been done. They want to share it, and it's a way to do that. Okay. Last but not least, they are free. They are up there on the internet. Not everybody has access to an amazing library. So if cost is a barrier, right? So part of that dissemination, it's not just fast, but it reaches more people. Okay, and that's a good thing. Okay, so that's the good. Then there's the bad, or at least the not so great, right? And we've talked about peer review briefly, and quality. There is no peer review before a preprint gets out into the world, right? And so, I mean, peer review isn't perfect. We've talked in the past about, sometimes things get published in journals that, the research isn't sound, and maybe eventually it gets caught and is retracted. But by and large, peer review is a useful tool to improve what gets out into the world in terms of research reports. Okay, so that's not there. Another one, and this is like the librarian talking, is there's no like effective central location to search for these things. There are a bunch of preprint repositories, which we'll talk about in a minute, but really it's not like, there's, the Medline of the world, or CINAHL, or whatever kind of library database that gathers all these things together. I say no effective because you can find some preprints through Google. Unfortunately, the way Google works, things that get clicked on more tend to float to the top. So if it's something that's really new, then you might not find it anyway, right? So it can be a challenge. If you do decide that you want to do a search for preprints, you can go to repositories. Like I said, there's a whole bunch of different ones. There's no one central location, and each one is a little bit different in terms of their search functionality, but they tend not to be super sophisticated, right? Like it's your Google keyword kind of search. And actually, if I flip over, we can have a look here. So this is MedRxiv. This one is focused specifically on health sciences. And you can see you can kind of browse by subject area. So you can be like, oh, I'm all about the health policy. So you click on health policy, but then it lists every single thing that has to do with health policy, right? So if we scroll down, there's at least 30 pages of this, which is not a super effective way to find things. You can also do the keyword search, or they have an advanced search. So if I was going to search this, I would probably want to look at the advanced search. So you do your search terms, but then you can kind of say, well, I specifically want to look for that in health policy, right? So you can kind of narrow things down a little bit that way. You can look for stuff in just the title, you can look for stuff in the abstract or the title, or you can look for stuff in the full text abstract or title, right? So you have some options, and you can say you want the oldest, you want the best match. So this one's not so bad. Another, if you want to compare, another repository, not to say that this one is bad, but it's a little less involved, right? So you have a search box. You can say you want to do the title or the abstract of the keywords, but you can't be like, I want to look for this, but in this general, but in health policy, right? You'd have to build that into your search. So like if I wanted to look at, so COVID is the topic of the year. So COVID and the homeless, right? I can look in the title only, I can look in the abstract. I'm going to start with the title only. Now these both have to be in the title, and clearly nothing has come up, right? So if I switch to title abstract keyword, yeah, I have a few things now, right? So we can kind of go through these as we would a regular kind of search. You can kind of see how popular things are on the side here. It tells you how many times it's been downloaded. If I like the looks of number 10, I can click on that and it get like the little warning saying, this is not a peer-reviewed thing, etc. You get your abstract, and then you can download the paper. This one doesn't have any comments, but that's okay. Depending on what you're looking at, so this here is a record for an article. You can actually see that it was posted to MedRxiv, but it was later published, right? So it's got that that information. So you could go to the published version if you wanted to, if you had a subscription for that. Or if you are a MyNet person, you could just request it. So if it's not available for free. And again, like you've got all the information, like the title and the authors and everything. This one, there are 5 comments, so we can kind of skip down to see what people are saying. And Like I'm not super up on the infectious diseases stuff myself. That's not my area of expertise. But they have some very good questions, right? Like maybe this study was underpowered. Then the authors, I believe this is the authors, one of the authors, they have a chance to reply to that. Another person says no zinc, why? So it kind of is a little more context about the discussion itself. And you can see again, um, the subject area is infectious disease, which makes a lot of sense. And this one is a little more librarian friendly. We like citation tools, so if you use something like EndNote or Zotero or whatever, you could download this to your citation manager. All right. So how are we doing on questions, Sorby?
No,
Anything interesting?
no questions currently.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah, so the next bad thing, and I will say this is a bad thing, is that since it is out in the world, anyone can read it, whether they have the required expertise to understand it or not. And there's been some instances where some preprints have been posted and gotten some media attention. And a good example is this one here from CNN, how a 100-year-old vaccine for tuberculosis could help fight the novel coronavirus. This was roughly this time last year. And of course, like this is the kind of thing that gets people excited because like, well, we've already got the cure. That's amazing. And if you read the actual article itself, it doesn't come out and say, this is it, like this is what we need, but it paints it in a very favorable light, and it points you to the preprint here, correlation between universal BCG vaccination policy and reduced morbidity, and mortality for COVID-19. And if you're a member of the public, you could read that, but you might not really understand the science behind it, right? So you can actually see, I don't know, it might be a little small, but it says comments. When I took this screenshot, there were 149 comments on this article. That's a lot of comments. And I actually looked earlier today and there was like 151 now. But so this made a splash. You can be sure about that. So much so that the WHO had to put out a scientific statement saying that there is actually no evidence that this is the cure, that this is going to prevent people from catching COVID-19 and developing symptoms. So that's very unfortunate because I think we've all, and probably to an extent ourselves too, but we've all heard people saying like, what do the scientists know? First, one day they say this and then it's not true, and that doesn't really help with the general public's confidence in science and medicine. So that's definitely a drawback, I think. All right. So those are the good and the bad. We talked about finding preprints very briefly there in that one particular repository, but there are a ton of repositories and they're mostly subject specific, right? So these are some that are particularly relevant to health. So this one, the MedRxiv, we looked at that super briefly. PubMed Central has a pilot project for research that's funded by the NIH out down in the States. They're actually including citations for preprints in PubMed Central. Well, they're including the preprints, I should say, in PubMed Central. Again, this is a pilot. Maybe they'll decide this is great and they'll do it forever, but maybe they won't. In any case, you might come across some, but again, it is limited to particularly NIH funded research. Okay, so there are a bunch of options you can try if you want to have a look. And of course, there's Google Scholar. If you wanted to get fancy, if you're not a general Google throw in a couple keywords kind of searcher, It can be more effective. So like we talk about in our Google session about how you sometimes can search a specific site. So if you wanted to do a site of the, or pardon me, a site search of the SSRN preprint server, for example, you could use Google to search that if you weren't happy with how their search functionality works, right? So that gives you some options. But like I said, Google is searching the world, right? So it's not necessarily gonna bring the preprints up front and center. Okay. All right. Oh, we did that part already. All right. So
Christine, we just had a question about will the slides be made available? And absolutely, we'll be sending out the slides at the end of the session so that you can, so you don't have to furiously scramble down all the names of those sites, and you'll have
all the URLs. Yeah.
the URLs and stuff. Yeah.
For sure. And I think we've established that I talk too fast. So that's a very big challenge. We like to make sure that everyone has all the information. So I'm switching over to Orvi. She's going to be our new presenter. So we can see your screen, Orvi. Oh, now we can't see your screen. There we go. But we can't hear you now.
Okay. Mute, Orvi, unmute. Good. So you can see now, yes? Okay, awesome. Yeah, so thanks, Christine, for that. And I will say, also, you don't have to feel overwhelmed if you look at those and think like, oh gosh, I need information about this like new thing that is out. I know I need to search preprints. This seems very overwhelming. You don't have to search it yourself. If you are a MyNet client, you can message us and say, I need a literature search on this. And you can specifically ask that we do include preprints. And sometimes we would do that anyway, but we would always let you know what the preprints were with a big caution of this is a preprint, you will need to critically appraise, which is why we've got some information here on critical appraisal. So critical appraisal is exactly what it sounds like. It's basically that you need to go through and appraise very critically what the contents of the article are. And Christine is laughing at me, I'm not sure why. Just might be normal. So we always say any kind of information that you're looking for. It doesn't matter if it's from the government or from a reputable source or an amazing journal, doesn't matter. You should always be critically appraising. But with preprints, it's like extra big asterisk for critical appraisal because it hasn't been through that peer review process. And sometimes the articles, you know, they'll be accepted and we'll go back and forth about like, should you be using it? Like you use the Canadian spelling and our journal only uses American spelling. And so then you'll eat up a month doing those changes. Other times it will be things like, actually, the results of this study can't be valid because you didn't include zinc or whatever the other thing, whatever elements, or you didn't have enough participants, or actually we can't tell what you've actually done here, so this cannot be valid because we don't know what you did. So how do you know how to do appropriate critical appraisal, especially for something that's in a preprint? There's amazing tools that are available. So the CASP, the Critically Appraising Research, they have a whole bunch of checklists for different study types. And I'm going to take you over to their website. And so there's a whole list here of different study types. You can say, okay, I've got a preprint and it is on a cohort study. So I've got that open here, and they've got this really helpful checklist. So it tells you like a little bit about the cohort study, a little bit about the questions that you need to go through. There's 12 questions in this one. I'll just zoom in so it's a bit easier to read. And all of the CASP checklists have a minimum of 3 core elements, which are these ones. Are the results of the study valid? What are the results? And will these results help you locally? So, and then you just scroll down and they have PDF versions that you can print and fill in by hand. They also have ones that you can fill in online. And they're really straightforward questions like, did the study address a clearly focused issue? Yes, I don't know, and no. And so then you go through and it makes you think critically. And there's no sort of grading. So it's not like, okay, anything that gets above 60% means you can use it. It's far more complicated than that. So it's because sometimes you might say, well, this study didn't have the greatest rigor, but it had enough, or like I'm going blind in this area, sort of like we were with COVID a year ago, and at least it would be something to help you, opposed to other times where it's like, wow, like this is just out of control and not acceptable. I don't care what they've claimed or their findings. What they've described is not, it's not robust enough, or there's actually errors within it. So just to show you another one, this is the one for randomized controlled trials. You can see that they've got 4 key elements, and they've added for this one about the randomization element. So to be a randomized controlled trial, it's very important that there was a randomization. So if you're thinking like, okay, Orvie, I don't even know what a cohort study is, or I don't know what a randomized controlled trial is. CASP has in their Knowledge Hub over here under glossary, they've got a really nice, easy to use definition. So you can come to it, click on it, and if I want to see the definition for observational study, then it takes me here, and here is the definition. So it's really meant to sort of work you through it. Critical appraisal at this level, it's a lot of work and it takes a lot of time. And so you might just, like, it might be something that you say, okay, I need, this is the only piece of research available on this. I will dive into it. Or sometimes you might say, I'm not equipped to do this. I need to consult somebody else who either can do this for me or who has already done this. And you also might say, actually, there's enough published literature already that has been through peer review or that has already gone through a robust kind of appraisal. I'll use that instead, and I'll just keep an eye on this and wait until either it's died in peer review or it has made it successfully through peer review. Another tool that's available is the AmStar, which is it's a measurement tool to assess systematic reviews. It's the same kind of thing. CASP has a systematic review checklist. This is another one specific to systematic reviews. It's based from a journal article, and it takes you through 16 questions, same kind of thing, just asking you questions. You really dig deep into that article and see what it and see how that study is holding up. And then finally, and again, we'll be sharing our slides. So there is Duke University. They've got this lovely guide that has a tab for appraise. And then you can go through and say, okay, like I need some tools to help me on looking at studies that are talking about diagnosis or economic analysis, or these are sort of, they're less about study type and more about sort of topics or design. So if you're looking at preprints, because sometimes it is absolutely necessary, make sure you're doing critical appraisal, and just understand that it takes a bunch of time, and that there are tools like these available to help you through that process. So if you go through and you find that there is a preprint that you are interested in, and I'm just going to reshare my slide here. There we go. So if you've decided that you want to use it, then you are going to need to cite it. And so you cite it just like you would a normal journal article or a report or anything else that you're citing. But the key important thing is that you include that it is a preprint or that you used it at the time that it was a preprint. So sometimes through the editing process, like sometimes it's pretty, it's just like copy editing kind of thing. Other times, maybe you've just, like sort of muddled your number, or like they've helped you present your research in a more accessible kind of way. So there might just be differences between what's available when somebody's reading it versus when it was a preprint. So it's just really important that you include that it is a preprint, and especially if, yeah, Christine, go for it.
Oh, I was just going to throw up that during the editing process, they might it might be a suggestion that you do a different kind of analysis, like a statistical analysis. So there might be additional information or different information presented in one than the other. So yeah, so the like you said, the date is and the fact that it's a preprint is important.
Yeah. And especially important too, even if if you're publishing your work or citing your practice for what you're doing, and that it's based on a preprint, that also is helping people to understand that that might change, in the next couple of months. And I know, Christine mentioned like about, gosh, can't these scientists and researchers get their facts straight? They're like back and forth, and today we say this, and nope, tomorrow we say that. That's actually the scientific process working. That means that it's properly being rigorous in the appraisal and in the interpretation of the research. So that is like high level overview of preprints. And Christine has prepared us a summary. So one side is, when should you use preprints? So certainly you can think back to a year ago. Even now, with where we are with COVID, there's absolutely topics that are brand new or that they're not well studied, and the only evidence might be in preprints. They're also really good for topics that change rapidly. And also, depending on what you're doing, you might need all of the research and all of the literature. And so if that's the case, then you definitely should be including preprints. Also helpful if you're really comfortable with your topic, with your subject, with your critical appraisal skills, absolutely use preprints. You just have to do that. Essentially, you do the peer review yourself. And also, if you're in a position where you're comfortable basing your decisions, depending on what you're doing, making decisions based on those preprints. So times when you want to be more cautious in using the preprints is if there's already lots of literature available. If there already is, utilize that for now and just keep an eye on those preprints and maybe incorporate it later. Also, if it's up to the minute, research isn't required. If there's nothing brand new, late breaking on on treatment of people with diabetes, there's one or two available other studies that you can rely on until this one thing makes it through its peer review. Also, you don't need preprints if you only need a few good studies. If you just want to get some background information, or you want to learn some more, or you want to help somebody learn something, or if you have a limited amount of time to look at things, look at the things that are already in that peer-reviewed evidence base. And if you're not comfortable with that concept of using those checklists and really going through and understanding what is good study design, what is appropriate statistics to be applying, how assessing how those statistics have been interpreted, if that is not your skill set, that is okay. We know that you have lots of other skills, or if you don't have access to someone with those skills. And certainly if you aren't comfortable making those decisions based on your personal analysis of a couple of preprints, then don't. There are other ways that you can use evidence-informed practice. So that is everything that we've prepared for today. We open the floor certainly to questions, and to prevent, in the before times, we would have our sessions go for 1 hour, but recognizing that everyone gets Zoom fatigue, or to give you a little bit of a break, we did schedule to end at 10:45 here in Central Time. So we've got 5 or 6 minutes for questions. Maybe while we wait for those to come in, we'll just emphasize that preprints are an awesome resource that are available. Thanks, the wilds of the internet exist. But there's actually some really good things that are helpful, and it's helpful to have this process available. And we're absolutely here to help you and support you. So I know some of you are here just out of interest, just to kind of maybe you've heard the word preprint in a press conference or in a meeting you were in, and you just wanted to have a deeper understanding of what they are. And others might be interested in actually, doing that critical appraisal and diving into what they are. And that is all okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and like Orvi said, everything you ever want to know about preprints in 40 minutes. It's a big topic. So if you have questions, please do ask either now or later. We'll do our best to answer. I did notice that one of the participants made a comment about the appraisal tools and that they would be useful if you're in a journal club as well. I know some folks on a fairly regular basis, do that kind of professional development activity. So that's a good tool there as well.
Oh, absolutely. When Christine says that I love critical appraisal, it's true. And we do, if you want to know more about critical appraisal, we also have a recording of a past session that we've done on critical appraisal. And it's similar to this. It's quite high level. We're librarians. So we're good at sort of like, is this a reliable source, or is it sketchy, or, just at a sort of cursory glance, is it meeting the needs of what we need to do with it? We are not the ones to teach you like how to calculate your confidence intervals and assess whether your study size is big enough, and we're by no means biostatisticians, but it's meant to be a starting point. And these tools exist because there's lots that you can do. Sometimes you can, instead of just looking at a study and going like, I'm getting this funny feeling about it, by answering those questions that are evidence-based, then it will help you say like, okay, well, the funny feeling I'm having is actually because, they ran a statistical analysis, but didn't have anybody who was qualified to run that analysis on their team, or whatever it might be. Or they called it a randomized control trial, but nowhere in the actual article did they actually describe the randomization practice. So because they didn't describe it, doesn't necessarily mean they didn't do it, but it means that we can't actually call it randomized because they haven't described to us how they did it. Okay, well, you are always welcome to contact us if you think of questions afterwards. And, we know sometimes that, 6 months from now, you'll be doing something and it'll be like, oh my gosh, preprints. Oh my gosh, Orvi and Christine told me about that and I've forgotten everything except that. I can contact them when I have questions about preprints, and that's absolutely the case. So make sure you've got our contact information, and we're always happy to help answer your question or to do the searches for you, whether it's inclusive of preprints or not.
Okay, so not seeing any more questions. So I have 10:44. I don't know if you want to hang on for that one last minute or not, Orvi.
I don't think so. We just thank you all very much for coming. And do we have a session next month?
We do not. This is the last session of the season. So,
last session of the season. So stay tuned for announcements about summer sessions.
Thanks for coming.
Thanks for coming, everybody.